Hello, my name's Owen Ward from the English Language Unit. Today I'm going to give you a speech about the European Social Fund. You don't have to start interpreting yet. I'll make it very clear when I start my speech. I'll just give you some vocabulary first, which I think will be very useful. First of all, the ESF, the European Social Fund. I'll talk about some young people who are known as NEETs, so people who are not in education, employment or training. They're from a disadvantaged background, another piece of vocabulary that might be useful. I have another acronym which may be of use, which is FASW, First Aid and Safety at Work. And then I speak about the French Labour Code, which is like the French labour law. And without further ado, I'll get started. My speech begins now. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the vast majority of the work that we carry out at international organisations as interpreters, about 99% of the work that we do, is simultaneous. That means that we're in a booth. But every now and then, especially if you have a retour, you also have to do some consecutive interpreting. So you have to use a notepad and go out into the field and actually take notes, like you're doing now. Recently, I was working in Paris for 3 days. I was at a 3-day meeting, and most of the meeting took place in a conference centre, in booths. But one afternoon, we had to go out and visit a project, and there I had to do consecutive. Now, the topic of the meeting in general was the ESF, the European Social Fund. This is a pot of money which comes from the European Commission, and the aim of this particular budget is to improve education, employability and skills, especially for young people and people from a disadvantaged background. As part of this meeting, we went and visited a project which receives funds from the European Social Fund. It was on the outskirts of Paris on a military base. And this project receives money from the ESF to provide training to young people. These young people are part of a growing group apparently of young people known as NEETs. That means they are young people who are not in employment, education or training. They are often from a disadvantaged background, and many of them have problems with literacy, meaning that they struggle to read and write. Now, as I said, it was on a military base, but the goal of this project wasn't to train soldiers. But the project tried to equip these young people with a certain number of skills to help them, for example, become more employable, to also boost their sense of self-esteem, their self-confidence, and to give them a sense of discipline. The project worked in 3 main areas. I'll give you the 3 main areas before I go into detail on each one. So first of all, first aid and safety at work. FASW, First Aid and Safety at Work, then driving lessons, and the third area was sport. So on First Aid and Safety at Work, the young people learned first aid skills, so how to help someone who is injured, someone who has fallen over. This is obviously a very useful life skill, so to help someone who's had an accident in the street, but it's also very useful for the workplace. Especially in France, the French Labour Code requires at least one person on staff to have first aid training. And obviously, if the young person has received this training before being recruited, that's much better for the employer because the employer doesn't have to pay for it. The trainees receive 14 to 16 hours of first aid training, and their certificate is valid for a period of 2 years. Now, the second area is driving. In France, like in many other EU countries, learning how to drive is often a very costly affair. It can be very difficult. Maybe you have to take the test a number of times. So having a driving license is a huge asset and makes you more employable, makes you more mobile. Through the project that I visited, the young people receive intensive driving lessons on both the theoretical and the practical tests. They receive a total of 190 hours of training. And then they do a further 200 kilometers of accompanied driving. The organisers say that because many of the participants have problems reading and writing, they wouldn't be able to pass the test the traditional way. So this is a huge asset for these young people. The third area is sport. Now, the idea here isn't to train elite athletes, but it's rather to boost their confidence, to instill them with a sense of discipline through sport. It was also about making sport a pleasurable experience, not a chore. Now, the young people were trained in a number of disciplines, in individual sports like running or swimming, and also in team sports like football and basketball. So they were really able to work on their teamwork, and this also improves their employment prospects because they can transfer this over to the workplace. On the whole, the project has been a huge success. 1,500 young people are trained on this military base every year. Their employment prospects are also increased. 80% of the trainees go on to find full-time employment after doing the program. And even though the aim isn't to train soldiers, around 6% of the young people end up going into the military. For me personally, it was a very nice experience too. It was lovely to see all these young people challenging themselves, pushing themselves. However, it did remind me that perhaps my consec skills were a little bit rusty. Thank you very much for your attention.